And welcome to the show, Harold Bollaci, an estate planning and trust attorney in Long Island, New York. How are you, Harold?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Good evening, Harold. How are you?
Hi, Dominic.
So first of all, Harold, we both wish you a very happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
I cannot think of a better way to spending your birthday than on the Lebenthal Report.
And this is exactly how I want to spend it.
Yeah, with me and Mike. I'm sure that was your first wish.
If you could get me a plate of carbonara, it would really complete the scene.
It'd probably be easier for me to make it for you, but that's
So Harold, let's just jump into this. I was thinking today, that we actually met you when Dominic and I were invited to speak in 2011 for the run-up of the Romney-Obama election. We were asked to speak. You were a guest, and we've been great friends literally since then. So That's been over 10 years, and that election seems so quaint compared to the last two that we've all lived through. But every new administration brings, as I don't know if you heard me saying this in the first break, I apologize. It seems to be the full employment act for estate planners. We start getting calls almost immediately. I read they're going to take away my deduction. I read they're going to take away my money. Should I put my money in a trust? Should I put my money in a mattress? I did read some plans that Biden had over the weekend that were a little disturbing, of really backtracking on some of the estate planning, the estate exemptions that we have now for the inheritance tax. But my experience has been that we always hear these rumors, and I don't think the inheritance tax has ever gone backwards. They've always threatened to lower the threshold, but they never actually have. So let's start there. What is your take with a new administration, a Democratic administration? What is your take on estate and inheritance taxes going forward?
I'm fairly optimistic that the new administration is going to at least hold the line on the federal estate tax regime. And the reason I say that is because estate taxes are very salient political talking points, but in practicality, they affect very, very few people. I'm sure it would not surprise you to know that in 2020, only about 4,100 estate tax returns were filed with the Internal Revenue Service. And of that, pardon?
In the entire country.
In the entire country.
What was the limit, Harold? What was the limit that you were required to file?
The limit is now up to 23 million for a married couple. It's 11.7 million for individuals. So broadly speaking, of the estimated 2.8 million people who passed away in 2020, only about 1,900 decedents' estates paid federal income tax. And it really only generates about $23 billion for the federal government. Yes, that's a lot of money for us, especially for you guys to even have that under management. But as far as the federal budget's concerned, they're giving away $1 trillion at a time. So worrying about trying to upset so many people with a reduction in the estate tax exemption, I just think would be politically foolish. I think most people, we all want to be rich someday. So this is a really salient political talking point, but in reality, very few people have to pay federal estate tax. So I don't think they're going to do very much with it. I hope they don't. I think they'd be ill-advised to do that.
I'm sure you heard a prior conversation with myself and Mike that is probably the most common question we get. If I die, I don't want the government to get my money. And clearly you're saying that's not going to happen, right? So what are the documents that we want to make sure our clients have in order? What's the priority of what documents these people should have lined up so that they don't have to think about this anymore?
Yeah, I think as we begin a new year, it's amazing it's already the 26th of January, but a new year is always a good time to reflect on your estate plan if you have one. And if you don't have one, it's certainly time to start thinking to an estate planning advisor or attorney. Key among them, basic things like healthcare proxies, living wills, powers of attorney, last will and testament. I hold myself out as a trust and estates attorney, so my preference is for people to do more trust planning. And that's really our goal for our clients is you want to get your affairs in order, you want to be prudent, but you also want to put things in place to promote the efficient administration of your estate, God forbid you pass. You want to minimize the amount of effort your family has to undertake, minimize the amount of expense, and of course, time. So could I share with you two quick anecdotes? The first happens to do with a longtime client of mine, not an older guy, he's 67. He had a stroke last night.
Oy.
And he's been saying for months, just write this down. He left my office about 6 weeks ago, write this down. And I said, you have to sign this. So now his family's calling me saying, well, do you have a healthcare proxy on file? Do you have a power of attorney on file? I said, yeah, we've been talking about it for 10 years, but he never signed it. So the answer to that is no. And secondly, as far as estate administration goes, estate administration, which is probate or administration in the surrogate's court where you pass, courts are closed in New York right now. I mean, not entirely, but what used to take me 6 to 8 weeks, this could take 5 or 6 months. So that's 5 or 6 months where your heirs have to try to cover your expenses, and they really don't have an opportunity to begin settling your estate. And that assumes that the will that you submit is accepted for probate and that none of your heirs or family members are challenging your intentions through the court process, which unfortunately is fairly common.
Do you have you seen, as a result of the pandemic, more people anxious to get their affairs in order who may have been procrastinating right along, like the example you just gave?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that's really gratified me is the desire to do estate planning as a result of COVID has been very broad. So it's not just the older clients. It's not people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. I'm having a lot more younger couples come to me just to do basics. Whenever I'm talking with young people, my first question is, who's going to be the guardianship of your children? God forbid you and your spouse pass simultaneously. And that's something that requires a lot of consideration and deliberation. So certainly I've seen a definite uptick in people looking to do estate planning and get things written down. Because once they're written down, you can revisit it as life changes. This isn't something that's set in stone, but putting pen to paper is very important. And especially, given back when we were shut down, nobody had anything else to do. Sit down, get it done, and forget about it.
Yeah. Let me ask you one follow-up question to that when dealing with young people, because Dominic and I get a lot of calls from young, new parents, newly married. And my advice for years has been, all right, whoever you make the guardian of your children, I don't know if I'd necessarily make them the person in charge of your assets or the person in charge of your life insurance benefit. They could easily make it the same person, but my advice has always been that they should be two different people. What's your opinion about that?
I completely agree, for several reasons. Number one, I think to your point, appointing a separate guardian of the person and a separate trustee over money, it establishes a set of checks and balances. It's another set of eyes, and I think that's very important. But it's also a way to include both sides of the family, because you don't always, if all of the decisions are going to the wife's side or the husband's side, you don't want to make people feel like they've been left out. So maybe the wife's side, her sister becomes guardian of the minor child, and on the husband's side, his brother becomes the trustee. and now they get to work together, and at least it keeps, theoretically it tries to keep the families together and engaged in the minor's well-being, both health-wise, educationally, but also financially.
Hey, Harold, I often get new clients coming in and we ask to bring their documents, and more often than not, they don't have anything. And the number one issue I get is it's really complicated and it's really expensive. And I would argue that both those comments are wrong. For the average person, the basic will and healthcare proxy and durable power of attorney, it's neither complicated documents nor expensive. You want to just touch on that one a little bit?
I completely agree with you. I always tell people, don't overthink it. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Who's going to be your healthcare agent? Who's going to be your agent under a power of attorney? If you pass away, where are your assets going to go? And keep in mind that a last will and testament and a trust, they only pass assets that don't transfer by operation of law. So you gentlemen manage a lot of people's money. You have retirement accounts, individual brokerage accounts. Those accounts have beneficiary designations on them. So they fall outside of a last will and testament because they pass by operation of law. And that extends to life insurance, annuities, and most other financial instruments. So a lot of times, a last will and testament is dealing primarily with people's primary residence and any other assets that might not have a beneficiary designation on them, including some personal possessions. But normally it's the primary residence that's the biggest issue under a last will and testament.
I wish we had more time, but just real quick, you mentioned personal residence. What do you recommend for a couple in a second marriage as it relates to last will and last will?
This is such a great question, and we could talk for days on it. The value of revocable or irrevocable trust planning to second marriages. In the business, we call them blended families. And the idea here is that you don't want to disinherit, either intentionally or accidentally, your spouse's children from another marriage. So it's very important when doing planning for blended marriages that, God forbid, one spouse passes, I like to include what I call trigger language, which makes assets that have been put into trust irrevocable upon the death of the first spouse. We certainly wouldn't want to create a scenario where husband or wife passes and the surviving spouse says, I never liked his kids anyway. They didn't come and visit him while he was sick. They're out. That probably doesn't reflect the decedent's original intent, and it certainly doesn't reflect their joint intent when they sign those documents. So putting a trigger in there to lock up what they've put in jointly is a very valuable tool for blended marriages.
Harold, I think we could have this conversation all night, but we are up against a break and you have to go celebrate your birthday. So thank you for joining us.
Best
Thanks
wishes,
so much for
Harold.
having me on.
Thank you so much. Can't wait to have you back.